is...
This is Channel 10 Nelson, your community access television. Programming on this channel is made by local volunteers. If you would like to be a part of your community television, please call 354-4200 or write to Shaw Cable, 613 Ward Street, Nelson, B1L1T2.
I'm going to call upon Wayne Prentice, a member of the organizing committee for this conference, to introduce our next speaker to you. Wayne Prentice.
Thank you, Bill. Dr. Cummins was introduced to you this morning, and in addition to the comments that Elizabeth made, I would like to add that he is most noted for confrontation with authorities at all levels, and that's a pretty important stance to be taking on environmental issues. He continues to work with community action groups struggling with problems of pesticides, incinerators, and dump sites, the destruction of PCBs on a global basis, and in particular in the Arctic, is one of Dr. Cummins' most important. To successfully fight the use of the herbicide spike in our Slocan Valley. So please join with me in welcoming him back to the West Kootenay, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Joseph Cummins.
Thank you very much.
How much time do
I have? Good, I think we've got our time sorted out now. Before I got going on, no, don't think, that's right. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so they give me till 10:45 for this effort, and that should be more than enough. Before I get going on the talk that I prepared, and I did circulate a manuscript of this talk because and I to take home. So I did leave something for people to take home. One aspect one area that I would like to get out of the way, though, which is a little bit administrative, and that is I'd like to alert people to an upcoming hearing on the Federal Pesticide Control Products Act. Now, I think Mr. Fulton, Jim Fulton's assistant colleague, can give you the exact date for those hearings, but I definitely think it's worthwhile. It's very important for citizens, and particularly young people, to participate in these hearings. Now, the hearings will be in the next week or two in Vancouver, and if possible, representatives from this area should try to be there and make representations to that group. And some little questions. I personally find that the structure of pesticides is regulated nearly totally by Agriculture Canada here in Canada, and we would like to see that changed, because you can't, out of one side of your mouth, you can't really say we're for agricultural chemicals, we're for agricultural technology, we're advocates for this, and out of the other side of your mouth you can't say we're advocates for the environment. So that I don't believe that Agriculture Canada can make a fair representation and hear all of the environmental issues regarding pesticides. So it would be better if in the future the control of pesticides went to an environment ministry, Environment Canada in particular, for all aspects including human health. I think that Canada is one of the last countries in the world that does not consider human health as a part of the environment ministry, and I think that's a necessary thing. And areas like the problems of spike and the use of forest herbicides, it's your one chance to get in there and make a representation to the federal government, and I hope that Nelson and the local community will come and make their representations when that board comes to Vancouver. Thank you. Now, I was lucky enough to get was the Living Earth, and I think that no conference on the environment in this time really should proceed without some discussion of Gaia. The area that I like to think is the most important is the realization that the earth is a living entity and the earth has rights, and the human beings must respect and protect those rights. It was a viewpoint which is really the keystone of the whole spirit, the whole soul of Aboriginal religion and thinking. And scientists have now just come back to this. So the idea that the earth is a living thing has been growing bountifully. One important the rights of the earth, the rights of the globe, and looking at the globe as a living thing with intrinsic rights, we will now have to make global laws which protect the rights of the earth. Last August, I was in Yucatan and in the southern part of Mexico, and one of the things that we did was take a horseback tour through the jungle and through some isolated beaches, and my guides were Mayan cowboys, cowboys who spoke the Mayan language, and they were particularly concerned about the accumulation of plastic debris on the beaches off the Mayan coast. And the reason that that was happening was that waterway was a kind of a superhighway for cruise ships, and the cruise ships just routinely dumped their garbage off the side, and it washed up on these isolated beaches in Yucatan, where it was producing terrible accumulations of non-destructible plastic. What would be a very small matter, as they point out. There's no reason in the world that luxury cruise liners can't keep their garbage and dispose of them the way the rational human beings dispose of them. So that was a quick lesson as to the essentiality of having global rules. I mean, certainly this plastic garbage washing up on the beaches of Yucatan and fouling those beaches in a persistent, almost permanent way isn't something that's a global threat immediately. But I mean, gracious, there's no need for it. I mean, why can't luxury liners behave like rational beings and handle their garbage appropriately? So we do have to have laws that protect the globe, and that was one example of what I was trying to say. Now, the catchword for the world as a living organism is the word Gaia, and Gaia, G-A-I-A, is really the root word for geology and all of the earth sciences. So there's nothing really mystic or science. And Gaia was the earth goddess of ancient Greece. And the use of her name then is one which is used in all of the earth sciences now. The basic idea is that the world is a living organism. The theory sees the evolution of the species of living organisms as so closely coupled with evolution of their physical and chemical environment that together they constitute a single and indivisible process. The largest living organism in the solar system is the Earth itself. The corollary then is that there are living and dead planets. The Earth is a living planet, but easily detected from outer space as a living scientist, as a living body, because the composition of the gases are improbable. They do require special input, energy input, to be maintained in this improbable conformation. So a space traveler or a foreign, an extraterrestrial community could recognize anytime they can focus on the gas composition of Earth that it is a living body or a living planet. Now, case, the important people, the important individuals, let's put it this way, on Earth are not humans, but the key individuals in maintaining the Earth as a living entity are microbes. And this has been true the 2.5 billion years that microbes have existed, that they control the climate, they control things on Earth. Only recently has man, as an interloper, been able to change this well-established relationship. And we're changing it in a way which will probably lead to disaster. A good example of Gaian thinking is the tropical forests dominate their local climate. The trees send back 3/4 of the rain falling on them, mainly, and bacteria living in the forest provide nuclei that start the growth of storm clouds, so that the living organisms do influence the climate directly by forming nucleation centers for rain, and they do depend on the rainforest. The bacteria then stimulate extraction of rain from passing air. As we destroy the tropical rainforests, and we are doing this at an alarming rate, the results expected include desertification, formation of large deserts, ethnocide, which is the death of cultures, and the extinction of species at a truly monumental rate. Now, Gaian theory demands then that we should establish a legal framework, establishing that the world is a living being, which has intrinsic rights, and against I spoke South and Central America, which are, of course, the focus of concern at the moment. I have an equal concern over the forests of northern Canada. I think few of you here are aware of the extent to which herbicides are used throughout northern Canada, and with the exception of northern Alberta, and in Gaian terms, I find this to be a very, very tricky operation, and one which I think can only lead to harmful long-term consequences. One of the things that struck me very much to the heart recently was studies from a university down east indicating that the herbicide glyphosate, Roundup or Vision, influences, causes detrimental impact on the mycorrhiza. The mycorrhiza is a community of microbes, principally fungi, who live near the roots of trees. Now, trees live in very delicate environments indeed, for the most part, particularly the northern forests are very delicate, and they absolutely depend on the health of the mycorrhiza, or they would not be there. You would have a large, very cold desert like the Gobi Desert. So injury to the mycorrhiza, although something which the environmental assessment boards cannot comprehend, is one which is like the first signs of cancer. It's an indication of a terminal state. Once the mycorrhiza is damaged, then the nutrients disappear and the whole north turns into a very, very cold desert. That's the Gaian scenario. So that's another good example of Gaian thinking. Lovelock in 1972. Lovelock was a chemist and actually a planetary scientist more than a biologist. He was greatly assisted by an American geneticist, Lynn Margulis, and in the theory, again, they distinguished between living and dead planets. The living planet maintains a balanced climate in the face of astronomical change. The key feature, the key indicator of the goodness of the Gaian theory has been that in the last 2 billion years, the output from the sun has greatly altered. It's altered very, very 7 to 10-fold at least. And yet the average climate on the face of the earth has varied very little. So the idea here in Gaia is that you maintain temperature balance in the face of great change, and you do this by a biological feedback mechanism, mainly dominated by microorganisms. Scientific critics of this theory have been quite harsh. They claim that there's no way to argue in favor of global altruism, and even suggesting that there should be, we would have to depend on forward-thinking committees of microbes who would set future agendas, or indeed, as they point out, some sort of a giant Panglossian nanny who took care of things in the future. A Panglossian nanny is a good word if you're doing Trivial Pursuits. Basically, the reference there is to the original planet, and Panglossian refers to derived from the original planet from which the original continent from which the various continents separated and divided. Refers to that planet. So the suggestion has to be that in order to maintain this system of biological forethought, you had to have a giant auntie or nanny originating on that giant continent. The fact of the matter is that this is not anywhere near the case. But or balancing relationships that we see with planetary climate are predictable based on the normal traits of microbes. But as well, recently, genetic theory has been revolutionized, and that by the finding that mutation or changes in genes may in fact respond to the environment, so that we're not we're changing genes were random events. They were not influenced. They were not Lamarckian in the sense that the characteristics were not acquired from the environment. Genetic changes were not influenced by, in a predictable way, by the environment. But Cairns' experiments go back to Lamarck, re-examine Lamarck and say that's not entirely true. Genes may, in fact, the microbes may shape their genes. Organisms may shape their genes to fit the environment. So I think most of the critics of Lovelock and the Gaian theory have been blown away. And in order to accommodate these changes as well, we have to accommodate fundamental changes in the way we look at genetics. And now we can say in genetics that the environment does shape genetic changes. So organisms tailor their genes to fit the conditions, and in a sense to influence the conditions so that life on Earth is optimized. Now, the most significant Gaian issues of the current period include destruction of the rainforests, and to me, the potential destruction of the northern forests in Canada, because these are the great protectors from the greenhouse effect. They're huge carbon dioxide traps. They clean the environment. Many serious scientists in Britain and Europe have banded together urging an emergency meeting of the United Nations to deal with the environmental issues. And like myself, most of them find that the United Nations is mainly prepared to deal with trivial issues. There are issues of vast importance to the world's population. So the politicians, as frequently happens in the United Nations, are ages behind. The Environment Agency in the United Nations, to me, is embarrassing. It's an embarrassing one to speak to, because they just gosh, they focus on things which I find so unimportant. And I think the United Nations may find, like in the case of the last Ontario election, that environmental issues can be very, very much issues of preoccupation, and they will have to change their thinking. Now, I want to get away for a moment to another kind of topical aspect of environmental thinking, and I want to go back to Commoner's laws. Barry Commoner's laws. Last night, Barry Commoner was mentioned. Barry Commoner was described as an ecologist, and that's partly true. But I knew him when he was, like myself, a molecular geneticist. So Commoner is a well-known ecologist, but started, and indeed his formal education is all in molecular genetics. Now, I think that Commoner's laws are worth remembering. And I quote them all the time as I go to meet citizens groups and environmental boards. First, the first law is that everything is connected to everything else, which is pretty obvious. The second is that everything goes somewhere, and that's a key one when you're dealing with pollutants like PCBs, and with the incineration issue, everything goes somewhere. The third is that nature knows best, and I think my grandmother said the same thing. And the fourth is that there is no such thing as a free lunch. The first law deals with interdependence of species. The second deals with interactions in which nothing leaves the whole system. For example, PCB pollution. The third and fourth law deal with the fact that human exploitation, for example, clear cutting, can only be achieved by the above laws are not a formal part of Gaian thinking, and I don't wish to leave you with that impression, but I think they're good laws, and they're useful ones in dealing with your environmental hearing boards, with even the municipal council. It's good to remind them from time to time that everything goes somewhere. Nature knows best, and most of all, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Now, I also would like to go on, particularly for the benefit of the students, if I can, to the idea of shallow versus deep ecology, shallow versus deep. These are useful ideas to have at hand, and you hear them more and more as time goes by. Shallow versus deep ecology. Shallow ecology is human-centered ecology. In other words, in shallow ecology, and again, I'm not using shallow in a pejorative sense. I'm proud to be a shallow ecologist. And individuals who put humans as the center of nature. Environmental principles are applied in the management and control of environment, mainly for human benefit. These campaigns in this area would include lead in gasoline, PCB pollution, and these are all consistent with the general approach. Sometimes you get overlap. Lead in gasoline impacts people principally because it causes mental retardation. And indeed, the argument against lead in gasoline was very cold-blooded in the United States. They pointed out that if lead stayed in gasoline for another decade, they'd end up with 30,000 people with IQs less than 80. And they pointed out that it costs far more money to maintain 30,000 people with IQs less than 80 than it does to ban leaded gas. They have not yet banned leaded gas in England, and therefore one believes that they may have found a use for people with IQs less than 80. I'm not sure. But at any rate, human-centered. When I turn to PCBs, it's a little bit trickier. The main concern with PCBs may be humans and particularly in the Arctic. So they threaten both the humans in the Arctic and marine mammals globally, but particularly in the Arctic because people in the Arctic eat more fat foods. They have to have more blubber to get energy, so you eat more fat. So even though PCBs come into the Arctic only by accident on currents of air, they're biomagnified to such an extent, and they accumulate in the fat to such an extent, they're actually posing a threat to the very survival of humans and animals living in the environment. The animals living in the environment are threatened. Now, on one hand, in a Gaian sense, traditionally you could eliminate the balance of nature, because this is mainly dominated by microbes. So it then becomes a question of, is this shallow or is this deep? At any rate, PCBs are an issue threatening both nature and humans. Now, when we turn to deep ecology, And he's actually formulated a platform for deep ecology. And what deep ecology does is it equates the value of human and non-human life. So these are put on par. And it also values maintaining the richness and diversity of various life forms. So these are the key issues. In deep ecology, we're no longer human-centered. In fact, many of the deep ecologists that I deal with actually believe that we'd be far better off without people. So, even though deep ecology does conform most closely to Gaian thinking, it's certainly not necessary to banish shallow ecology from Gaia. And I want to point out that deep ecology does have some very frightening academic adherents who don't believe in famine relief and things of this nature. And one does not like to see this kind of anti-human thinking become prevalent. So, in the end, in the long run, what we're stressing is the essentiality, one, to formalize the intrinsic rights of the globe and to formulate these as laws. So now I've gone from this heavy discussion, and I'd like to go over some very much lighter issues, some very much lighter things that I think that we might do to show respect for the earth. And one of the key things that I press every time I speak, and I think recently I was speaking in a small community in Ontario on Lake Huron, and the newspaper there, the weekly newspaper there, caught my sense very much. They described me in a way that I thought was a superb compliment given the nature of what I'm trying to discuss. They called me an unkempt professor. And what I'm stressing is the importance of being untidy. The importance of being untidy. And I think that what I'm trying to develop here is that chemically clean homes, our preoccupation with cleanliness and tidiness, is in fact highly injurious to the environment. Of those things which I dislike, and I may be self-indulgent to go over these now, but I think I will anyhow, but I say avoid air fresheners. I call them oxymorons. I mean, they're toxic chemicals that dull your sense of smell. In no way, shape, or form can they be called air fresheners. And again, avoid toilet cleaners and fresheners because they disrupt the balance of microbes in sewage treatment. Floor with dangerous biocides. The washing machine sends 90 pounds of detergent into the environment each year per family. Avoid deodorants. They disrupt the skin's natural bacterial flora. Cut down on home and personal cleaners. We're not as smelly and dirty as advertisements make us believe. In other words, what I'm saying is that we're conditioned by people who need to sell things, and we're conditioned to do things which are injurious to the environment. And if we look at these rationally, we don't have to be as squeaky clean as society demands of us. No. Also, I want to deal with the garden. I'm particularly fond of dandelions. They're edible and they're beautiful, and yet we feel compelled to destroy them. And it's peculiar. I've suggested that if I was a space invader, if I was an invader from an extraterrestrial world, that I wish to take over the world the easiest way, I'd come disguised as a dandelion. I mean, beautiful, harmless, and edible. people will go berserk. They throw tons of toxic chemical on me. I easily overcome the toxic chemical, and they self-destruct. Look at 2,4-D. No, this is true. Diazinon, an insecticide used in home lawns, is destroying the songbird population. And this is a serious threat. The combination of diazinon on huge lawn plots and the use of carbofuran against corn root rot in the Midwest has caused a measurable and very, very serious elimination of the songbird population around the Great Lakes. But it's diazinon, I believe, is the major contributor, and it should have been banned a long time ago in Canada, and it must be banned now. Herbicides used in patios are among the most dangerous, and why not just live with weeds in the patio? Look at my patio. Recycle organic matter in a composter, and don't throw it in the garbage. Hybrid evergreens have tough leaves and inedible seeds. They need not be planted in disease, all right. They grow fast, but nothing can eat them. And we do have some regard for the birds. Highly bred flowers make with unusually strong colors and scents are beautiful, but if you select only these, then you have nothing to feed. They do not produce nectar for the most part, and therefore you don't feed bees and butterflies. A small frog pond is the most valuable thing, provided you keep the pesticides out of it. Next, wild animals like groundhogs, squirrels, and birds are not vermin. And why should I say a thing like that? Because I'm finding this shocking thing in Ontario, in the Toronto area. People are getting terrified of any kind of animals. Birds, squirrels, groundhogs, everything is considered vermin. And I can't imagine, I mean, I have neighbors who get terrified that, because I feed birds and squirrels, they see, you know, they're so frightened that the squirrels will come in and eat their houses. And really, they have this schemes and they hate them. And this is a real thing, I see it all the time. They consider anything living to be a vermin. And that's a frightening idea, but it's true. Okay, in the end then, the last thing I have to say, and that's the thing certainly weedless lawns and patios. These are signs of chemical abuse. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, are there any questions? Question over there? Yep.
I know people were worried about the idea of not wearing deodorant anymore. Just comment on the tactics for the ruin of deodorant and possible releases of natural deodorant, and how do you feel about those alternatives?
Thank you. The question of using aluminum and chemical deodorants, one of the strongest one of the deodorants used commonly nearly through 1970s was a rich source. There's growing evidence that in high quality it contributes to human ill health. Certainly natural deodorants are good. What's wrong with odor? Is odor, why do we psychologically why do we look at odor as bad? If you look at most other animals, a dog, my God, you know, the odor is everything. The whole world is odor. And no, this is true. And as I think you know, in animal evolution, that the thinking brain evolved from the smell brain. The smell brain is the progenitor for the thinking part of the brain. And thinking and smelling are together in the fish, all the other animals. And what are we doing to ourselves? Individual imprint and saying there's something wrong with it. I don't know, it's something to think about if you can stand it. Yeah, thank you. The question was regarding people who objected to songbirds and objected to birds and animals, and what do you say to them? I haven't found anything I can say to them. I mean, they scare me, so I run and hide usually. I don't know. If anybody can volunteer what you say to them, why. By the way, in the recycling programs, they say about composters, they say they keep out wild animal vermin. And I hate that word, because that's squirrels and a lot of other very beautiful animals. Yeah.
Well, suggestion on what you can say to them. Swallows eat 1,000 mosquitoes. They're being destroyed by the pesticides down there. We're having less swallows here, so we're having more mosquitoes. But if you could educate them on how the birds control our environment, then
thank you.
Perhaps they'd understand.
Yes, this lady was suggesting we should educate them as to how they I can't imagine why they aren't just nice, because they're beautiful and they're live and they're there, but they're just beautiful, you know. I mean, God, even if they didn't do anything except produce, you know, defecation, I think they'd still be well worth. They'd be well worth it. Gosh, they produce a lot less than we do. Yes.
I'd like to thank Dr. Cummins one more time, so please join me. Thank you. We appreciate and we enjoyed what you had to say. Thank you.
We're going to get going, ladies and gentlemen. We've had a tremendous evening. We had a tremendous evening last night, a great morning session, and the program this afternoon promises to be a great one as well. A couple of items before we get going. There have been questions. Also, the president of the Teachers Association in this district, and she will introduce our next speaker.
I'm very honored to introduce this afternoon's speaker. He's a man who has a wide range of working experiences, and when you listen to a person who speaks from actual work experience, you know that they know what they're talking about. And he has then a well-rounded appreciation of concerns for the natural resources that we have in BC, and
Thanks very much, Grace. The agenda item for this afternoon, I don't really need a mic. I could probably go without it. Let me move it down. How's that? A little better? Speaking about standing on guard for Canada brings a lot of things to mind. It certainly did for me when I was putting my mind to what I should try to convey to a very varied group that we have here today. Let me tell you my whole life from the age of less than 1 on the BC coast, the last 20 years on the largest of the Queen Charlotte Islands, Graham Island. I live on the east coast in a small burg some of you will have heard of called Tallel. The only 2 really serious occupations that I've had, because as I said earlier today, I graduated in 1974, which is 16 years ago, and I've spent the last 12 hidden away in the House of Commons. But in between getting out of university, and during the years I was in university, I was involved in both diamond drilling and percussion drilling to make a living, so I know a fair amount about the mining industry. I briefly logged. I did it on my own and didn't do very well, so I will never be able to claim that I'm a successful independent logger. Following that, I was a probation officer and did both probation and parole on the Queen Charlottes. And an anecdote I often use, because no one really thought I would get elected in 1979 when I ran spent my first day on the floor of the House. I said to a reporter that I felt quite good to be there coming as a probation and parole officer because I recognized the clientele. Canada, in my view, will only be strong and free once environment is everyone's #1 priority. We have reached the point in the Industrial Revolution where it is no longer the limits to growth. It is truly the growth of limits. And I'm going to give you some material so that you think about that for a moment. It's really the theme of what I have to say this afternoon, that it's no longer the limits to growth, it's the growth of limits. Canada, many people say, is running out of trees. Bigger sawmills and bigger pulp mills alone make the problem worse, not better, and I'll explain that in detail. We already know that we must reduce, we must recycle, and we must replant. Canada is running out of undammed and clean rivers. We know we must conserve, be more efficient, and move to the zero discharge of toxics that either biomagnify or bioaccumulate in the life forms in those rivers and lakes. Canada is losing agricultural land to erosion, salination, and general degradation. We already know that we must plant windbreaks, cut down on fertilizers, and eliminate pesticides and herbicides. Canada is running out of wildlands and places where nature is free. And we know that the floor that the Brundtland Commission has recommended is that we must set aside at least 12% of our natural lands. Resources are being consumed not from the interest on capital, as suggested by the Brundtland Commission, but rather from the capital itself. To stand on guard for Canada, we must change our ways. We must obviously educate our politicians, we must educate our educators, and foremost, we must educate ourselves so we know the questions to ask. Then we must tell industry with our buying power what we want. We must tell our politicians what we want for an environment. And to achieve this and stand on guard, we must have more education like there is during this conference to get high on nature. I'd like to spend a moment on environmental issues and policies for the 90s. It's an awesome agenda, but let me take some of them generically because we've all heard the common slogan to think globally and to act locally, and obviously that's where we have to begin. Listen to a few of the facts that were put into the Brundtland Commission and a few that I've extracted from periodicals that I read, and look at Canada amidst the mega symptoms of the global crisis. And I really seriously suggest that whenever you're approaching an issue, whether it's an issue in a community here that can be divisive, like the Celgar Mill, or any of the other myriad of issues that come along, These are the kinds of thought-provoking figures I suggest you use as an opener to get people to think seriously globally so that they can act appropriately locally. There are 3 children born every second. That means if there were 600 people in this room, in just during today's proceedings, 40,000 will die of starvation and preventable disease. The population will rise from 5 billion to somewhere between 8 and 14 billion during the next 60 years, within the lifetime of most, if not all, of the students who are here today. Both 8 and 14 billion are beyond the carrying capacity of the planet. 90% of the increase will be in the poorest countries, and 90% of that 90% will be in cities already bursting, cities like Mexico City. 20,000 species will become extinct this year. 1/2 of the world's species will be extinct within 50 years. Worldwide, 11 million hectares of rainforest will be destroyed this year. 1 acre every second goes up in smoke. It's not used for commercial production of veneer or for sawn products or for pulp. It's simply burned. In Canada, we lose on average 2 million hectares per year to forest fires, and that alone releases 60 million tons of carbon dioxide into the global commons atmosphere, because carbon dioxide that's released in Nelson today simply adds to the concentration in the commons that we share with all life on Earth. In just 1990 alone, we need 100 million hectares of healthy forest just to consume the carbon dioxide we release. 100 million hectares left exactly as it is without touching it in any way. We harvest 1 million hectares of forest lands and timberlands in Canada this year and in each of the last 10 years. Canada seconds. And those are the sort of figures that need to be discussed when we talk about not only a proposal like to expand Celgar, but any of the other many and varied forest proposals that there are in every province and in both territories. The rate is accelerating. Alberta, for example, proposes to allow foreign pulp companies to clear-cut 1/3 of the entire land base of the province. 221,000 square kilometers are proposed in the licenses for those mills. At a time when we have the technology to recycle paper 7 times, by simply adopting California standards for recycling, we would save 80 million trees per year, or the entire volumetric cut of the province of Ontario, or 1/3 of the cut of the province of British Columbia. That's simply going to California recycling standards. We wouldn't achieve that immediately because of the problems of collating and concentrating recycled products all into one place, but it gives you some idea of the capacity that there is out there to really get recycling going, and rather than always 5th, 6th, and 7th time that paper can be used. In the majority of developing countries, there is now a lower per capita income than there was 10 years ago. Stephen Schneider touched on that, and I'll touch on it again this afternoon. Military expenditures exceeded in the last 2 years $1 trillion per year, and it's rising. In Canada, we spent on defense over $12 billion this year. That was an increase of $700 million from last year. And the total Environment Canada budget for this year is $972 million, which is an increase of $100 million but it still means that the military priority in Canada is 12 times that in terms of the base budget, or 7 times that in terms of the increase in priority that the government has placed on it for this year. We've heard a lot about sustainable development. I responded to one question this morning as to what is sustainable development and how do we get there. There has been a rather crude attempt by some parts of the Canadian industrial base to co-opt those words and to simply start using them and to pretend, to try to portray their operations as having been somehow turned into some kind of benign operation. In order to evaluate choices, and it's something that I will come to in the conclusion of my remarks, how I think we need to force upon government, municipally, provincially, and federally, the need for an extra parliamentary, an extra industrial operation, which I describe as the environmental liaison concept, which will allow for a balancing and an opportunity for things to take place within the right time frame so that we can realistically deal with local issues, whether it's local questions about the allowable cut and the provisioning of wood for either existing or proposed mills, or whether it's for additional thermal plants, or for Camano completion, or for the Old Man River Dam, or for the Rafferty Alameda, or for any of the various and significant environmental problems and decisions that we face. In most industrial countries, including Canada, environmental policy is directed at symptoms. So how do we get policies in place that deal with the cause? Sustainable development has been taken over, as I said a moment ago, in terms of what we see, the sort of green revolution that's supposedly coming with Loblaws, where they repackage existing kinds of soap in a green box, and in many cases are putting out something that is not substantially changed. Some of them are obviously mildly progressive, but the really serious steps that we need to take in terms of how we manage our agricultural land, how we manage our forests, how we manage the amount of carbon larger, an exponentially larger issue that is not being pursued seriously by government at any level in 1990 in Canada. The environmental response has been to look for other language and to try to get the issue back on track. People have described it as a sustainable ecological development and all kinds of other phrases that attempt to recapture the intent of the Brundtland Commission. I don't know how many of you have read or haven't read. I won't ask you to raise your hands. If you haven't read the Brundtland Commission, you should. You can read it easily in an afternoon. It is a very well laid out document, and it can provide for you in almost any sphere the basic information that you need as a serious environmentalist. And here I'm talking about everyone having to become an environmentalist regardless of their political or personal or theological persuasion. We all have to get on board, because as Stephen Schneider and others have pointed out, the risks that we are playing with are absolute. It's not a matter of a guessing game in terms of many of the ecological consequences of population growth, the erosion of, for the first time, we've seen an actual decline in the availability of food on Earth in many, many years. So we're facing absolute environmental issues. So to make informed choices, I was interested in a literacy quiz that was conducted by the University of Calgary. I'm sure some of you saw it. If you haven't, you should certainly pick it up. It's filled with all kinds of amazing information. It was done this spring with quite a large audience in Alberta, right across Canada, sorry. But it found, for example, that 1/2 of Canadians are unaware that the Earth goes around the sun once each year. 1/2 of Canadians are unaware that the Earth goes around the sun once each year. It's amazing. I mean, I know we find bizarre statistics from time to time. 15% of American citizens think that Elvis Presley's still alive and lives in the Arctic. So there are strange things that you find with quizzes and with statistics, but I think we should on simply misunderstanding an issue or not wanting to understand an issue, but they're based on a series of seriously faulty premises. And it's our responsibility, those who will put the extra energy in, combine our interest in issues with the pursuit of options, and get that information out in a consumable form to those people who often, I find, particularly on forest issues in this province, are now driven by a fear for their livelihood, are driven in many cases by misinformation, are manipulated by large forest interests that are tending to use many workers as shock troops in communities. I know in my own area I spent 3 hours on Tuesday evening meeting with a group called the United Northern Citizens, who are openly funded by the forest industry to make my life miserable. They take out wanted posters, full-page wanted posters of me, and put them on telephone poles and harass my staff and all kinds of things. But I found that by taking 3 hours and having seriously evaluated all of their phone calls, all of the petitions and all of the letters that had come in, and taking the time to research out all of the questions that have been posed, and then taking 3 hours of abuse. I mean, even when I quoted from consolidated estimates, having people raise their hand and say, well, that's not true. And basically suggest that I was fabricating material to try to present a case that was not of substance. But it's something that none of us should back away from. Decisions that are made in relation to the natural living resources around us will have a profound. I will come back to the issue of forests again in a moment. How many present know, just as an example, that a joint federal-provincial study that was concluded last year concluded that there are $150 billion in net savings to adopt an energy conservation and an energy-efficient policy for Canada over the next 10 years. I mean, I've often wondered how it's possible that someone like Michael Wilson or Brian Mulroney, who must be looking for friends somewhere, would not take an opportunity to announce a new energy conservation and efficiency proposal that would save every single one of us here $5,000. What kind of a government would hide such a document? It took me months to get my hands on it. No government has published a rebuttal. Our Minister of Energy, Mr. Epps, we have to start adopting some of these measures. And it seems to me that there are reasons why documents like that are both withheld and then subsequently buried. Is that the oil patch don't much want it out? I mean, I puzzle right now in figuring out how sweet crude coming out of the ground in Alberta that was being produced for 30% less than it's being sold for now only 60 days ago. It's coming out of the same hole, it's going through the same refinery, it's going through the same pipeline, it's going into the same tank truck, it's being run down here and it's being put into the gas station right here in Nelson, and yet the price of that gas has gone up 30% or more in the last 60 days since the beginning of the Iraq conflict. I haven't heard Minister Epp or others give a realistic and honest explanation as to why a country like Canada, which is not a significant net importer of fuel products, has had to do what we've done. In the next couple of years, And much like Loblaws, they are presenting themselves as the green alternative. If Canada would only go nuclear, we'd be able to clean up our atmosphere. I give you a very well-researched, documented study that you should refer to when you see this starting to come along. We won't find it in BC, certainly not during the coming election, but it may come our way soon. So a paper written by two postdoctorate researchers, Drs. Keepin and Katz. And in the United States, each dollar invested in electric efficiency displaces 7 times as much carbon dioxide as a dollar invested in nuclear power. Let me just say that one more time. In the United States, each dollar invested in electric efficiency displaces 7 times as much carbon dioxide as a dollar invested in nuclear power. And yet nuclear power, both in Canada and the United States, is promoting itself as the answer to the greenhouse effect. I don't think there's anyone here that would disagree when I say that the political institutions, the legislatures and Canada's Parliament, are in significant decline, and politicians are held universally in ill repute. The polling that's been done of 20 different possible job categories or situations one might find oneself in, last year politicians were only found to be 1 step above convicted sex killers, and this year we find ourselves below. It's a reasonably terrifying situation to find oneself in when one thinks that the need for a political level to have a stable, free, democratic society is such that you have to try to attract people into it and try to keep people who are of some value there. But Canada now has the highest rate of turnover, the shortest political life expectancy for an individual of any elected democracy in the world. That probably is a healthy thing, but at the same time, when we look at governments through the filter of the environment, one can see that it doesn't bode well for the environment. I believe that the way to go about it, and it seems to me to be the kind of thing that can be encapsulated and understood by the public, and that's to put aside 1% of the gross domestic product. In Canada, that would be about $4 billion for this year, and put it into environmental liaison centers. And what those would be in areas like this, for dealing with, particularly as an example, a forestry issue, is you would have a very highly trained technician who knew where habitat, watershed, the basic net product profitability for pulp that's produced in this area now, and on and on and on and on. All of that information would be lodged in a locally available facility. You don't have to build new ones. It could be part of a school, it could be part of a library, it could be part of City Hall, but it would be an environmental liaison center where technical data that was relevant at that moment was available, and that location would be plugged into all of the available upset technologies, such as Canada's Parliamentary Library, the Congressional Library, all of those various areas where information is available so that informed and intelligent decisions can be made. The other point that has to come with it is that the capacity of the system as we have it now to respond to environmental issues is too slow. And let me for a moment put on the hat of a developer who might want to proceed with a project. It's seen as being impossible in many situations with varying interest rates, varying costs of money, availability of resources, the timeline that's required to find a niche in a national or an international market. All of those forces come to bear on a business decision. And for business decisions to be made, they have to be made in a timely manner. And this is what the government of Alberta finds objectionable about their desire to complete the Old Man Dam. But there are enormous bodies of opinion that don't think it should be proceeded with the way it is, either because studies haven't been completed, or from a federal perspective, the federal government has not carried out its duties. But it's off to the Supreme Court, so who knows how long that will take. The Rafferty-Alameda case, clearly a case where the government of Saskatchewan is involved. Into where there were 57 people holed up in a treatment center at Oka. Well, what of Canada's environment in Saskatchewan? What of the Rafferty? What of the Alameda? Here you have a government in open violation of a federal court order, and you have politicians nightly on the television saying, yeah, 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 yeah. It drives the public out of our minds, and we can no longer put up with it. So, in order to have an expeditious, extra-parliamentary organism, this wouldn't be big brick institutions built in Nelson and Masset and Vancouver and Red Deer and Montreal. These would make use of existing facilities to as great a degree as possible, existing available expertise. It would provide, obviously, for some legal and expert evidentiary assistance for developing cases, so that the public interest, so that the public weal is in fact represented, so that decisions are not continually made in a conspiratorial manner, such as the provisioning of a special cabinet exemption to Alcan to reduce the level of the flow of the Fraser River by 3 feet at Hell's Gate. I think we should be collectively appalled that any government would not agree to have an environmental assessment of such a project. Let me flip back for a moment to forestry, because it's crucially important in this province and in Western Canada because of the decisions that are in the process of being made. Sweden has twice as many jobs for every 1,000 cubic meters that are cut. Oregon and California have 3 times as many jobs for every 1,000 cubic meters cut. For every $2 BC spends on forestry, R&D, Sweden spends $6. For every $1 British Columbia spends on forestry, R&D, the United States spends $7. Over the last decade, in the forest sector, British Columbia has lost 35,000 jobs without a single square centimeter of land being set aside for protective purposes, either in a national or provincial Class A park. So the argument that is being used in many areas is entirely false, that the sole purpose of environmentalists who are active on forestry issues in British Columbia is to set aside huge to the removal of land base from the forest sector. There has been no removal. There has been technological change at a very high rate. One of the speakers earlier today pointed out that Mac and Blow alone in the last decade has given up 9,000 jobs, while it's seen a dramatic increase over the decade in its profitability from tech change. The argument, as I said before, is not jobs or the environment, it's jobs and the environment. If we take the composite of what I've been talking about in terms of increasing value added, increasing research and development, moving seriously on the issue of recycling, setting aside, it would be very easy to set aside 12% of British Columbia, as recommended by the best scientific minds on the planet, as being the minimum that an area like British Columbia should set aside. The income about 1/10 that of the average British Columbian. They are prepared to set aside what Brundtland has recommended, and we have to do the same. And again, as an earlier speaker pointed out, setting aside the 12% of British Columbia that's suggested at the moment would remove only 3% of the existing annual allowable cut of the forest sector. And there are many very well-informed foresters who have suggested, and I believe them, that we must reduce the annual allowable cut of British Columbia by 50%. in order to have truly sustainable development in the forest sector. To stand on guard for Canada, we must get the message out. It is jobs in the environment. And perhaps more significant than all of that is that we must repair some serious damage that we've made to the web of nature. We must treat this planet as the only one that we will ever have. Now let me be more specific for a moment before I come back to what I describe as the 1% option, one that I think we should be very supportive of and force government to implement. Government has what are called command powers, extremely wide-ranging powers, ranging all the way to the capacity to suspend civil liberties and so on. And Canada does have some good environmental legislation, but it's we're waiting expectantly to see what the final pulp mill effluent regulations will be. What we already know as a result of inaction on that single issue is that 1% of the fishery, and that includes crab, prawn, shrimp, groundfish, shellfish, and now potentially salmon, describe these kinds of issues. The recent Minister of Environment in Ontario described the dozen or more major spills into a river called the St. Clair last year as industrial incontinence. The fact is, we have the technology to avoid incontinence. You don't have to have political will to command compliance. In BC, Dr. Murray Rankin, a year ago, who's a law professor at the University of Victoria, evaluated Class 1 and Class 2 waste permits in British Columbia and found that 75% were in significant non-compliance for more than a year. So you have to ask yourself, okay, you finally, as a group, get politicians to put something on the books to protect water quality, air quality, the degree of harvest, whatever you're talking about. And then when you find that political decisions are being made so that 3/4 of the permits that are issued are not being followed, you know what has to be done. I don't need to suggest it here today. The cost of compliance must be made competitive and profitable, and that will only come by making non-compliance more costly, and I suggest including severe jail terms, including life incarceration for certain owners and managers of continuously polluting operations. And the reason I suggest life incarceration is that I've certainly often unique to go, not just in Canada, but throughout many parts of the world, to some of the most devastating things one can imagine, things like the Love Canal and others, where individuals knowingly and wantonly continued to profit while they knew not only was it damaging the environment, but was leading to ill health and potentially the death of those who lived around them. Most Canadians, regardless of political persuasion, have been taught that market forces and market signals are enough to protect the environment. That's what many politicians take to the road in elections for regional district, municipally, provincially, and federally, is, let's cut back on government, let's deregulate, let's let the market forces deal with it because the market will respond to all of these issues. I suggest that anyone who even reads the Brundtland Report once will realize that that is naive in the extreme, and that the requirement both for government in a legislative sense, but also now for an extra parliamentary power, something that is at arm's length from politicians, regardless of their goodwill, regardless of their political persuasion. The issue of the environment transcends politics, and we have to get that message across to politicians so that we get that kind of a structure properly funded beyond the bounds where they can manipulate it. In some cases, it is true was where some people actually went and had tests done on Perrier water, one of the tests actually done right here in Canada, and found benzene in the water, and Perrier had to recall and withdraw hundreds of millions of bottles of Perrier from around the world. The company would comply because an issue of public health was there, and because consumers were voting with dollars. They stopped buying Perrier water. But that brings me to another rather interesting issue. It's not such a big one here, where we still have pure or reasonably pure water to drink, and that's that in parts of this country like Ontario, a bottle of water, a liter bottle of water, now costs more than a liter of gasoline. And it must lead us to really think hard about what we're allowing to happen in our environment, that we will spend more for water to drink that's only unchlorinated than we would for fuel for a vehicle. In other cases, in my area that's 81% in excess of its annual allowable cut, and it has just shut down one of its mills. We have not been getting the big picture, the overall big picture of what the continuation of our most important industry, our largest employer, really means. And I think that's what we have to demand and accept no less when we're looking at issues such as Celgar right here in our backyard. Another example of collective non-compliance is in relation to an issue not so current right here, but one that I hope we soon adopt, but actually force compliance to, and that's that in 1987, Canada's present Prime Minister signed the annexes to the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement requiring zero discharge of toxic materials into the Great Lakes. Zero discharge. And that includes dioxins, furans, phenylbutylates, all kinds of things like PCBs and other things. But the quality of water in the Great Lakes continues not to recover, and there is only one way to deal with that, and that's with command compliance. You make it more profitable and cheaper not to pollute. What's happening right now, because of the level of fines that are given, the amount of enforcement that's provisioned, and the fact that collective non-compliance is wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you know what I mean, it's okay, Jack, don't worry, we're not going to bust you. We can no longer afford that kind of an approach to the decline in many areas of our environment. In standing on guard for Canada, we must have information. That's the foremost and libraries that are properly and regularly kept up to date on issues of local interest, and where it's an issue of national interest, to provision that material as well. Education. It's absolutely fundamental. I said it earlier today, and I have to say it again and again and again. Our teachers in society have an enormous challenge before them. There is not time to produce new textbooks to provide to all of the students in British Columbia about the issues of the environment. It has to be built in on a regular daily basis into every single class, into every single opportunity, whether it's phys ed or anything else. Why not take a run and set up a particular trail system through some trees where it's actually part of a science project? Check and see how different trees are going. Check and see how the squirrel populations are going. Check and see what's happening with fish in a given area. Make it a much broader and ecstatic experience. Joe said it, others have said it who've spoken here. The greatest single opportunity for us to learn, and let's remember where our species came from. We are part of nature. We are not outside of nature, and the greatest opportunity that we have to learn from is from environment itself. Let me stop there.
the end of last year's conference, participants suggested on their evaluation forms that greater student participation would greatly enhance the entire intention of this conference. And as a conference planning committee, we're really excited that this year, last year, our numbers were approximately 1/3 students and 2/3 adults. This year, we have about a 50-50 split, and we're really excited about that. The ones that solve the problems and ultimately have a real say in what happens in the future. And to that end, we put together a roundtable discussion. We've given 6 students the opportunity to take part and share their thoughts and their opinions and their feelings on this topic. And the topic is, what environment means to me and my concerns for the future. And I'm going to start by introducing over here we have Lena Monqvist from Okanagan College in Winfield. We have Patrick Burley from Rogers Secondary School here in Nelson. Lillian Wright is from Lucerne Elementary Secondary School in New Denver. We have Erin Anderson from Sentinel Elementary Secondary School in South Slocan. Patti Bishop is from Salmo Secondary School in Salmo, and Annan David is from Lloyd Crowe Secondary in the Trail School District. I'm going to start by asking Lena to start with her opinions and thoughts and feelings on our topic for this afternoon.
Stuck her with knives in the side of the dawn, and tied her with fences and dragged her down. This is an excerpt from a Jim. My fear for vision of our future Earth. My greatest fear is apathy. If you can't get people to listen, if they refuse to care. Apathy can be defined in 3 forms. Denial, refusing to accept the existence of the problem. People like this won't admit a problem exists because if they did, they'd feel obligated to do something. The second form would be just not caring. These people live only for today. They don't seem to realize that it's their children that'll have to live in the mess that they leave behind. The third way is admitting a problem exists. I don't have to do anything about it, because they'll do something about it. They always do. This would be fine, except please, tell me who is they. The second thing that really scares me is a superficial attitude towards environmental solutions. This can be especially damaging because it fools people into believing that everything is being fixed when it's not really. The first way of doing this, for example, jumping on the green wagon because it is the thing to do. The Canadian government is an excellent example of this right now with their green plan. I took part in the planning sessions in Vancouver in June. The process was so frustrating to me because they grouped people together that couldn't possibly agree. For example, in my group, there was a Macmillan Bloedel executive, a grassroots environmentalist, a bank manager, the Chevron PR man, a bank manager, a teacher, and myself. I really felt this frustrating because I was the youngest person there. There was no youth. There was myself and the guy I went down with who's a year older. I found this I believe the government made the green plan so public so that people would believe something was being done because they really don't want to have to deal with making solutions that'll work. The second way is looking at a problem from a subjective point of view, sort of like a mindset. One example is a recycling-only train of thought, in which a person ignores, for example, the other R's, refuse, reduce, reuse, but still feels as though they're doing enough to help the environment. My third concern is our materialistic society's high standard of living. This scares me because the standard of living is measured in materialistic wealth rather than the well-being of the earth. I don't understand how we can afford not to take into account the environment when we're considering this standard. Because the Earth's health is our most valuable asset. Without it, we have no life. Though all this may seem rather depressing, I still have a hope for a good future for the Earth. But ignorance can no longer be an excuse. We must take the initiative to educate and be educated on environmental problems and solutions. We must follow our instincts that something must be done when you hear about a problem, and then learn the facts of the They tend to have closed-minded views, whereas we can view the whole picture objectively. We must question them and help them to do their jobs in environmentally sound ways. Through lobbying and voting, we must force our government to change. The politicians' future depends on us, and the environment depends on them. In 1989, the Ministry of Forests got 80,000 letters. To them, every letter represents the feelings of between 500 and 1,000 people. So you can imagine just the effect that we could have just writing letters to them. We, the youth, are the future politicians, and we must educate our peers now. Also, I really feel that adults must learn that the youth are knowledgeable. We can't be talked down to. And our solutions tend to have more creativity and idealism, and they lack conformity. This radicalism is needed to revamp the future. We must reevaluate what our standard of living consists of, and this must force us to reduce our consumption of materialistic goods. We must put the environment first. We don't always have to have answers, but we must ask questions when we consider something to be wrong, even if society seems to feel it's proper. We can stop the coming of the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. Our next student is Patrick Burley.
Hello. When I first heard about this conference, it was through my principal. He said that they're looking for a round table for the environmental conference, and I signed up. Next thing I knew, Bob Harrington was talking to me on the phone, asking me what I thought of the environment and what my concerns were. When he said the word environment, the first thing I thought of was local things. When he said environment, I thought pollution. First thing I thought of was Selgar and Castigar and Kaminko in Trail. I thought of the smell that. We must think on a world scale. We must think in Bolivia, they're destroying the rainforests. In China, as it was said earlier, if all the Chinese were raised to even half of our standard of living, they would produce more waste and carbon dioxide in the air than if we all had fixed it. And I'd like to explain the environment in an offhanded sort of way. I like to think of it as a legal case. Think of an assault case on the earth. In an assault case, you need two things. You need a first action, and then you need a trial. We, as the human race, would fail in the trial. Humans are guilty of this. We struck first, the earth is on its way declining, and in a trial, a prosecutor would say that we have global warming as a result of humans, that we have ozone depletion as a result of humans, we have polluted water as a result of humans, and we also have acid rain as a result of humans. All we would have to offer we have our big cars, and we have 24-hour cable networks. Now, one of our most powerful weapons in the world today is the media. If we can learn to use the media, these cameras here, and I'm sure there are reporters among you, we can use the media, get to the politicians, and if what we say is heard, we can change the world and the course that it's on. Have you ever sat in a room with a lot of people, no animals, no plants, the air is stale, and it's hot? This is what we're offering to our children in the future and future generations if we cannot repair what we are doing right now. What I would like to do about the earth and the problem we have is we can recycle, and we can stop using the products that are damaging the earth right now. Drink boxes, for example, we can think of harmless. We had them last year. Drink recycle because you have to separate all these products. We can use, say, bottles, koala coolers, etc. have gone from drink boxes originally to bottles now. And that's much more environmentally sound, and we can reuse the bottles or recycle them like in the cups we received at this conference. Lastly, I'd like to emphasize the recycle, the reuse, and the reduce. Each of these words has an impact upon environmentalists, of which we are. The recycle, paper for example, we do not need white paper. The only reason that we're using white paper is we're sending it to politicians for the letters, we use it for computers, when we could use the recycled paper, which is a nice shade of brown, it's not bad. We can reuse. Our school at LV Rogers has adopted the reuse from last year's environmental conference. The computer labs that we use for outputting our data go into a box. And then for scrap work or even school work, if the student doesn't have the paper, we can give them the paper that's written on one side and it's white and plain on the other side. We can reuse it. Don't have to be put on paper. We can use compact discs. We can use our computers. We don't have to put everything on paper for proof. That's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Our third student is Lillian Wright.
Good afternoon and hello. My name is Lillian. My beliefs about the purity of my surroundings has changed from a feeling of security in my environment to a worldly view of a fragile ecosystem. People don't own the planet owns us. Life is not taking, conquering, and dominating. Life is appreciating what we have and what we are given as human beings. It is our responsibility to the earth to first take care of ourselves and to second protect other species and natural resources. The sustainability of the environment must come before economics, because without Mother Nature, humans, the business world, and society could no longer exist. I don't know how many of you watched the Nature thing about the wolves a couple weeks ago, but I did, and I was sickened. To me, it was just another example of how we feel we dominate. We kill the wolves to save some of the caribou, to kill the caribou. It's totally ironic. I believe in radicalism. I don't mean changing brown into toilet paper or dish soap. I
I mean taking a stand to defend Earth to environmental problems. I realize that to change the planet, you must start as a consumer, changing your lifestyle. But after that, you have to expand your vision. Make the visions fit together to get a whole planetary picture. To me, radicalism is getting in touch with that planetary vision. The world's environmental problems are a direct reflection of how individuals feel inside. When an individual feels angry or greedy, their negative input into the environment will not create a peaceful, serene environment. So when you into the earth, I am proud of all of you who are here today because you are unselfish. You must love yourself enough to want to change the world. I would like to define the term, name, or status symbol associated with an environmentalist, because too many people limit themselves to thinking that environmentalists are a type of person. An environmentalist is a person who recognizes that the earth is not a commodity, but a living being that can operate only as a whole. Every species in balance, none missing. If you appreciate the air, water, vegetation, or animals, not for their resourceful qualities, but for their beauty, you are an environmentalist. To me, there are 3 F's to complement the 3 R's. If you break it, fix it. If you magic, your beauty entrances me. Your rhythm beats through me like a pulse. In a world where everything is music, my senses are overwhelmed. There is so much to learn from your ancient faces in the wilderness, who whisper to me softly and only an echo, just part of the pulse. A thunderous, disturbing noise begins. The music of life is distorted. Screams of silent anxiety are recognized only as scars in the soil. The wrinkles of the tree are parted by the merciless blade. In the forest, a faceless man embeds his work boots into the moist soil. So easily it can be removed. He is ready to cut you. He knows only his job. He is blind to the faces of remorse in the trees, deafened by the sounds of cutting, deaf to the sound of dying. Tree friend of mine. As dear to me as you are, my tears slip evenly down your bark. Your sap sticks to my skin, and I examine your lifeless body. Your sap-like blood stains my soul. In my forest of innocence, there is now only dust. I recognize your soil as gold, the water as silver. I can't understand your body as prophet, now removed, once this is forest of mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. We'll now hear from Erin Anderson.
The flaming deserts. I have seen only a small part of our world so far, but these parts have been very beautiful. A few years ago, my family and I went on a trip to the Queen Charlotte Islands. We saw ancient moss-covered forests and lonely beaches. We also saw vast clear cuts and garbage washed up. As well as having the heads emptying directly into the ocean. It's difficult to enjoy being in the environment when you know the impact you're making on it. My main concern is that people will not be able to change their ways and attitudes towards the environment before it's too late. I'm afraid of living in a world where it's unsafe to swim in the lakes and oceans, where the air that you breathe is full of poisons. Look back at the earth, we're struck by its smallness, its fragile beauty, its loneliness. They were moved to a great love and tenderness for their home. It's not feasible to send everybody to the moon to discover this. But perhaps there's another way. to instill these feelings in them, and I hope we find it soon.
Thank you, Lillian. And next is Patti Bishop.
Hello, my name is Patti Bishop. I'm from a rural area outside of Salmo called Meadows, which is 45 minutes from here. I live in a log house and I love nature and the animals around me. Whenever I want to, I can go hiking. The mountains are just out my back door. The trees are wonderful and I like to pick huckleberries on my journey. I love the moss hills, the clean air, and the blue sky. The skiing in our region is terrific. I love the feel of the sun on my back and the wind on my face. It is great to be by myself going downhill or cross country, and the view from the top of the mountains is magnificent. The water in our area is the best. It is sparkling clean without any chlorine or other chemicals. Whenever we can, our family buys recycled paper and paper towels. We have a big garden at home, so it needs lots of nutrients. We put all of our peelings, coffee grounds, and eggshells into a compost bucket, which later goes into a compost bin. I love my local environment and am angered at what I see happening to our planet. I wish for everyone to have clean air to breathe, not lungfuls of smelly smog. I want oceans to be full of living things, not wastelands for our garbage. Flowers should be blooming everywhere, not pushed aside for more factories and parking lots. The rainforests are very important to me and to all living things on the planet, and I'd like to see them protected forever, not turned into scarred farmland for a few cattle. All ecosystems are beautiful and important and need to be saved. I have many concerns for the future. The main ones for me are conservation, pollution of water, and wildlife. The people in our communities and in much of the Western world are helping to destroy our beautiful Earth. Many people buy ozone-friendly aerosol containers, which is great, but why do we need those products in the first place? Are they really necessary? The stores in Salmo still package meat in styrofoam and plastic, none of which can be recycled. There are many products that contain dangerous chemicals out there, and the consumers still buy them. Therefore, it is not only the company's fault that the Earth's resources are wasted and destroyed. This use of unnecessary products and excess packaging increases the litter problem. Once a year in Salmo, like many communities, we have a community garbage pickup. Every street is cleaned of the filthy mess that other people had left behind. A big part of cutting down on garbage is refusing to use unnecessary products and reusing others. If you do buy milk, bread, and groceries with plastic bags, save them and use them as lunch or freezer bags. Pollution of the water and ordinary people dump thousands of tons of leftover waste every minute into rivers and creeks. This kills fish and makes swimming dangerous. Disposable diapers are piling up in our garbage dumps by the millions. They stink, they're not biodegradable, but mothers and fathers still buy them. I would like everyone to know that cloth diapers are cheap and can be used again and again. Bleaches and detergents are very toxic. Clean water left. Even though some of the animals I love are frightening, I still want them to be protected. The wolf in many parts of the world is extinct, and it is very sad that we are losing one of the smartest, most beautiful creatures ever created. Jaguars, panthers, and leopards are also becoming extinct due to loss of habitat in the rainforest. A major concern for me is animal cruelty. There are many places that force-feed geese and veal calves. They are forced to live their short lives in tiny cages that are never cleaned. They will never see their mothers or drink real milk. Scientists have wasted huge amounts of money developing a red contact lens for chickens. This lens keeps the chickens from pecking and killing each other in those huge egg factories. I would rather see the chickens roam free on a farm than stuck in a tiny building forced to lay eggs. I would also like to see hunting banned forever. I think the animals should be controlled naturally by other animals than by humans. I can't stand things. These poachers often saw the faces of live, wounded elephants, leaving their bodies to die and rot in the sun. Other elephants tried to make it come alive while the baby lies beside his dead mother until he too dies of dehydration and starvation. The issue of the environment is a very emotional one for me. I feel very strongly that we as human beings must get our act together soon, or most of the plants and animals on the planet will be gone forever. Rats and cockroaches may then be the dominant species. Is that what you really want?
Thank you, Patti. And our last speaker is Annan David.
Good afternoon. But seriously, what does the environment mean to me and what are my concerns? The more I thought about this, I found out that it's not specific things we can do, but rather human mentality and attitudes. If we can change these, we can change anything. And I found 3 mentalities or attitudes that people have, that if we could change these, we might actually get something done for this planet. First of all, the Earth is a beautiful place, and the environment is important, so we should take care of it. Tomorrow. No. Everybody just seems so busy. And if you really think about it, the environment is not too high on everybody's list of priorities. We take for granted that there will always be a tomorrow, that we can always do things tomorrow. Many people don't realize that we're accountable for this earth. We're responsible for it. And I'd like you to imagine, what would your statement be on a day when we wake up and there is no tomorrow? Are we just going to stand there and go, I think we screwed up? No. We have to be responsible for what we do. Do you know it's rumored that by the year 2000, if the government raises its environmental standards and the conditions now don't improve, the most industrialized areas of this country could be deemed unfit for human life due to high levels of toxic contaminants. That is sick. It's disturbing and it's sick. As I listened to our guest speaker, he said 80% of all waste are disposed of illegally. Now that's even more sick. Many people don't realize that we don't have a tomorrow. Our environment is not a game. You just can't put it in another quarter and play again. This is it. We can't act like we're the only life forms on this planet. You know, every time we come by Christmas time, we always have announcements on TV and the radio saying, drink responsibly during this Christmas season. Well, why don't we pollute responsibly? It's our responsibility, isn't it? Furthermore, if we, being environmentally concerned, do nothing about the environment or delay action, we are as guilty as those who don't even care. The time to take action is now, not tomorrow. The second point I came up with is the earth is beautiful and the environment is important, so we should take care of it. But let the experts deal with it. It's way over my head. Wrong. You see, if everybody takes care of what they can do now, doing their little bit, nothing is insignificant. Everything adds up. You know, it's really humorous. I'll bet you any amount of money if you go to any school and ask, what does being environmentally conscious mean to you? The majority of the answers will be something to the effect of, environmentally conscious, does that mean you go to the beaches? It's way over my head. I don't want to pay attention to it. It's beyond my scope of thinking. Whatever teenagers say and do, it narrows down to 2 words. Nothing and I don't know. Whatever they mean to say, whatever they say, it means these 2 things. So the confident teacher walks into his classroom and he goes, okay, class, I'd like to give you a talk on the environment.
We have to stop the emission of chlorofluorocarbons into the atmosphere because they destroy the ozone layer. And once the ozone layer is destroyed, ultraviolet rays from the sun enter our atmosphere and the skin cancer rate can go incredibly high. And plus, the greenhouse effect can ultimately destroy all of us. He looks up at the class, there are blank stares everywhere. And then he goes, okay, why don't I try asking questions to these people? Let's see if I can get them involved. Okay, class, what is the ozone? I don't know. Why is it important? I don't know. Do you care? No. Do you want to care? I don't know. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. How can you relate? The more we know, the more responsible we'll become. Do you realize that the plastic Doritos bag that a student eats his chips out of and leaves on the lawn will be there after he dies, after his children die, and after their children die? If you ask me, that's one heck of an obituary statement. Many people try to bring it into your scope. The more you learn, the better you'll do. Many people are blind to the peril our Earth is in. We'll find out what peril it is in. Many people are ignorant to the consequences of what happens if we don't pay attention to it. Find out. You can think of it in this analogy. Let's say you had a deadly disease and you knew there's a cure somewhere. Would you just go on living as if nothing happened? Life is normal. I can handle it. There'll be a tomorrow. No, I think you'd be doing as much as you possibly can to try to save yourself. That's what we should be doing for our Earth. What you can do can affect your future. In my school, I've seen many a student walk up with his pop can in his hand, and we have these environmental bins that are painted blue for pop cans alone. On one side of the door is the environmental bin, on the other side is the garbage can. And that student will stand there for 2 minutes deciding which one to put it in. I mean, like, it takes a rocket scientist to figure out it goes in the blue bin. That's good. Use your common sense. Think about what you're doing. The third point I came up with is, the Earth is beautiful and the environment is important, so we should take care of it. But I'm too insignificant. No, you're not. What if everybody thinks this? We'd be nowhere. If it isn't starting with you, make sure it does start with you. Every little bit you do, like the teenager with the plastic Doritos bag in the garbage can. Every little bit you do counts. I think that everything, even the smallest thing, is significant. It's our Earth, it's our situation, and we've caused our problem. Let's deal with it. You know, it's really ironic that we are destroying the only thing that is going to preserve us in the future. We are part of our environment. We interact with it, and we're part of our ecosystem. So what we're really saying is we're destroying ourselves by the pollution we're putting in. Now, human beings are supposed to be logical, emotional, reasoning creatures. Tell me, does this follow any lines of logic, reason, or emotion? No, it doesn't. This is what I feel our environment means. If we can change these 3 small attitudes, we may actually save this planet. Thank you.